start out by saying, you know, when Ralph Nader asked to run with him, you can't really say no, particularly if you pride yourself on trying to build a more humane and egalitarian society. And it's made much easier by the illogical attacks that I've seen him have to weather. It's amazing the number of times people say to me, and people say to Ralph, that the war in Iraq is his fault, the Patriot Act is his fault. Every American ill, every societal ill is somehow Ralph Nader's responsibility. And I'm also astounded when the Democrats talk about the 2000 election, particularly what happened in Florida, and they do it in a way that suggests that the only solution to this problem that they could possibly manage to come up with after 8 years of dealing with it is fundamentally an anti-democratic one, to say that a citizen in our democracy with different views isn't allowed to run for public office. And it's astounding to me that intelligent people find this to be credible. You know, when I got into the race with Ralph, I did a lot of interviews right away, and people would say, but why are you running? I mean, Obama's going to get the troops out of Iraq. And I would say, well, actually, that's not what he's saying if you listen carefully. Tim Russert asked him that question in a debate in New Hampshire, and you know, I'll give Senator Obama credit. He told the truth. He would not commit to getting the troops out of the war in Iraq by 2013. He also was using code words. You know, he would say he would keep enough soldiers there to fight counterterrorism and to strike at Al-Qaeda. John Podesta, who was chief of staff for President Bill Clinton, and who now heads a public policy group called, I think, the Center for American Progress, estimated that that meant keeping 60,000 soldiers in Iraq. That was the low estimate. And Amy Goodman and others started asking Obama these questions because Nader and I were out there saying, wait a second, they're not talking about getting out of the war in Iraq. And of course, lo and behold, he started admitting that, gee, well, we can't really get the 140,000 private contractor soldiers out of Iraq, and maybe we don't have to keep them in Iraq, maybe we'll put them in Kuwait, and gibberish like that. Slowly, what started to emerge is the true story of the Democratic Party complicity in what is wrong with our society. I mean, if you start with the war in Iraq, you have to come to terms with the fact that the Democrats are not an opposition party. Even if you look at their actions not as a minority party in the House of Representatives or Senate, but if you consider Nancy Pelosi's ascendancy to the speakership, it only gets worse. Here was somebody that told us over and over again that if the Democrats could take back the House, they were going to stop this blank check for the war. And it sounded so good. And I sat around with some friends and I said, boy, you know, this is really going to set back the third party movement because the Democrats are going to sweep into office and they're going to stop the war and do all this good stuff. And it's going to take us years to convince people that you know, they should look elsewhere. And even I, even with my political know-how and experience and political maturity, whatever I might have, even I wouldn't have imagined that they were such cowards and that they could not keep their word. What happened? Well, in the year before Pelosi became the speaker, the billions of dollars that we put into the war measured $116 billion for the Iraq war. When she became speaker that year, it was over $160 billion. And this year, of course, they put forward something for $178 billion, was one of the counts that I saw. And of course, Murtha and some of the other representatives, they start saying, well, you know, we got to vote on this whole package early. We got to get it out of the way. And it's an incredible thing to say. What is it that you're trying to get it out of the way of? You're trying to get it out of the way of the American public at election time when they're trying to decide who should be their president, because you don't want to admit to the American public that you're not an opposition party, that you're not against the war in Iraq, and that you're complicit in all the things that, Ralph Nader was to blame for. Remember that? It's incredible. You look at the Patriot Act. How is it possible that the Patriot Act could be introduced by Sensenbrenner on October 23rd, get passed out of the House on the 24th, out of the Senate on the 25th, and signed by President Bush on the following day? In a 4-day period, all of this activity happens, and yet it's not their fault. And even if you give them an excuse and you say, gee, you know, it's tough after 9/11, we can't expect any politicians to have any courage and stand up to that kind of wave of, you know, patriotism or whatever you want to call it. You look at the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, and the numbers are astounding. The reauthorization, which in effect kept all of the major provisions of the Patriot Act in place, passes the House by 251 to 174. So it passed. But what a lot of people don't realize is that 44 Democrats voted for it. So of the 251, if you took 44 out of that column and you put them in the no votes, it would have been 207 for it and 218 against it. It would have been defeated by 11 votes. You look at the Senate, only 10 senators had the courage to say no the second time around. The first time, just Feingold. But even the second time, only 10. Obama, Clinton, both voted for this. Now, it's astounding when you consider some of the rhetoric of this campaign. Obama is quite interesting to look at what he's saying. He says, quote, "We can't afford a president whose positions change with the politics of the moment. We need a president who knows that being ready on day one means getting it right from day one." Well, if you get it right and you oppose the war in Iraq when you're in a state legislature and you want to be elected president of the United States based on a theory that you got it right, but then you voted for all war funding and the Patriot Act, you voted to put Condoleezza Rice in a Secretary of State position, even though she's one of the architects of a war that you say had no foundation. You go campaign for Senator Joe Lieberman, one of the most right-wing hawks that there are out there in the United States Senate, who's now supporting Senator McCain. Why would you do these things, and how could you, with a straight face, get in front of people and say, I got it right, though. You got to vote for me because we can't afford a president whose positions change with the politics of the moment. Now, I went onto his website, which I don't often do, but I couldn't help myself, and I stumbled across his strategy for how we would end the war in Iraq as the United States Senator. And his strategy was really quite astounding. Now, he says the Iraq war should have never been started. Okay, that's good. But he says the will of the American people must be followed. If President Bush won't end the war, it's up to Congress, the representatives of the people, to end it instead. We need 16 Republican senators to override a veto. Any 16 of the 49 Republicans can choose the people over their party and decide to end this war. This is what David Sirota of The Nation has called the innocent bystander fable. It is what was referred to earlier. The Democrats basically want you to believe that they needed a majority to stop the war. Now they want you to believe that they actually need to override a veto to stop the war. And here you have an American senator who either is purposely not telling you the truth or has been there for such a short amount of time that he doesn't even know what the rules are. Because you don't need 16 more senators to get you to 67. What you need is, you've got 49 in your party. You've got at least Bernie Sanders that gets you to 50. You only need 41 out of those 50 to stop an appropriation, and you do it by filibustering. And if you control the House of Representatives, Speaker Pelosi, it's even easier. You don't even need that. The Speaker can keep the appropriation bill from getting to the floor of the House for a vote. The majority gets to control that. The war in Iraq would have been over, should have been over, whatever it is, 14 months ago.